The laboratory was sealed for 37 years. When they finally opened it in 1983, everything inside was covered in dust except for one thing, a single notebook. Lying open on the table, the ink still looked fresh. Attention! The case you are about to hear was concealed for decades. Before we begin, write in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is right now, because this story began at exactly the same time. Dr. Harold Whitmore graduated from Princeton University in the year 1928. He was 24 years old. His thesis on electromagnetic fields and neural activity was praised by colleagues across the country. They said he had a brilliant future ahead of him. By 1932, he was working at the Belmont Research Institute in upstate New York, a private facility funded by anonymous donors. The building stood 3 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by pine forests and silence. Whitmore lived alone in a cottage on the institute grounds. He never married. He had no family visits recorded in the guest logs. His colleagues described him as polite but distant. He worked late most nights, sometimes until dawn. The lights in his laboratory would stay on while the rest of the building went dark. In the spring of 1936, something changed. The Institute's director, Dr. Emil Voss, noted in his personal journal that Whitmore had requested additional funding. The request was unusual. Whitmore wanted to build what he called a resonance chamber, a sealed room lined with copper mesh and specialized electrical equipment. He claimed he was studying brainwave patterns, specifically patterns that occurred during moments of extreme focus or meditation. Voss approved the request. Construction began in May of that same year. The chamber was completed by August. It measured 12 feet by 12 feet. No windows, a single metal door with a lock on the outside. Inside there were electrodes mounted on adjustable arms. Recording equipment lined one wall. A chair sat in the center. Whitmore spent hours in that room, sometimes entire nights, but the recordings he made were never shared with anyone. In October of 1936, a janitor named Thomas Brennan reported something strange. He said he heard sounds coming from the laboratory late one night. Not the usual hum of machinery, something else. A voice, speaking in a rhythm that didn't sound like normal conversation. Brennan described it as chanting or reciting. When he knocked on the door, the sound stopped immediately. Whitmore emerged a few minutes later. He looked pale. His hands were shaking. He told Brennan to leave. Nothing more. Brennan mentioned this to another staff member, but no formal report was filed. Weeks passed. Whitmore continued his work, but those who saw him noticed changes. He stopped eating in the common dining hall. He started wearing the same clothes for days at a time. His hair grew longer. His eyes had a strange intensity. When colleagues tried to speak with him, his responses were brief, almost mechanical. Then came the incident in December. On the morning of December 14th, 1936, Whitmore was found standing in the Institute's main corridor. He was staring at the wall, not moving, not blinking. A secretary named Margaret Hale approached him. She asked if he was feeling well. Whitmore turned to look at her, and then he spoke. What he said was not in English. Hale later described it as a series of syllables, repeating in patterns. She wrote down what she remembered hearing. The phonetics made no sense. Linguists who examined her notes decades later could not identify the language, or if it was a language at all. Whitmore did not respond when Hale asked him to repeat himself. He simply walked back to his laboratory and locked the door behind him. Dr. Voss decided to intervene. On December 16th, he visited Whitmore's cottage. He found the interior in disarray. Papers covered every surface, diagrams of waveforms, mathematical equations, and strange symbols drawn in charcoal on the walls. Voss asked Whitmore to explain. Whitmore said he was close to a breakthrough. He said he had been recording frequencies that existed outside the normal spectrum of human hearing. He claimed these frequencies carried information, When Voss pressed him further, Whitmore said something that Voss recorded in his journal that same night. "They are not random. They are speaking." Voss asked who was speaking. Whitmore did not answer directly. He only said that the patterns were consistent, repeating, intentional. He said he had been trying to decode them, to understand the structure. He believed that if he could match his own brainwave patterns to the frequencies, he could receive the information more clearly. Voss was concerned, but he did not yet believe Whitmore was unstable. He suggested a break from work. Whitmore refused. He said stopping now would be catastrophic, that the window of reception was narrow, that he was running out of time. Voss left the cottage that evening with a sense of unease he could not fully articulate. 2 days later, Whitmore stopped coming out of the laboratory altogether. Staff members reported seeing lights flickering inside, sounds of machinery running continuously. But no one saw Whitmore himself. Meals left outside his door remained untouched. Voss considered forcing entry. But Whitmore had technically not violated any institute rules. His contract allowed him full autonomy over his research space. On the night of December 22nd, the power went out across the entire institute. It lasted for 4 minutes. When the lights came back on, the staff noticed something. The laboratory where Whitmore worked was the only room that had remained illuminated. Emergency protocols required all rooms to shut down during power failures. But somehow, Whitmore's equipment had continued running. The next morning, Voss decided to enter the laboratory. He brought 2 other staff members with him, a physicist named Dr. Alan Mercer and the head of security, a man named Joseph Klein. They knocked on the laboratory door, no response. They knocked again, still nothing. Klein unlocked the door using the master key. What they found inside was later described in a sealed report that was only declassified in the year 1998. Whitmore was sitting in the resonance chamber. The door to the chamber was open. He was wearing the electrode headset. His eyes were closed, his lips were moving, but no sound was coming out. The recording equipment was running, reels of tape spinning slowly. The walls of the chamber were covered in writing, written in what appeared to be chalk, or maybe ash. The writing was not in English. It was not in any recognizable script, just symbols, repeating in vertical columns, hundreds of them. Voss called out to Whitmore. No response. Mercer stepped closer. He noticed that Whitmore's hands were clenched into fists. His fingernails had broken the skin of his palms. Small drops of blood had dried on his wrists. Klein reached out and touched Whitmore's shoulder. Whitmore's eyes opened instantly. He looked at Klein, then at Voss, then at Mercer. And then he smiled. It was not a natural smile. It was too wide, too controlled. He stood up slowly, removed the headset, and spoke in a calm, measured voice. "I have been in conversation," Voss asked. "With whom?" Whitmore did not answer immediately. He walked over to the recording equipment, stopped the tape, removed the reel, held it up to the light. "This contains the proof, but you will not understand it yet." Mercer asked what was on the tape. Whitmore said it was a sequence. A sequence that repeated every 11 minutes and 43 seconds. He said he had isolated the pattern, that he had synchronized his neural activity with it, and that in doing so he had achieved reception. "Reception of what?" Voss asked. Whitmore looked directly at him and said one word: "Instructions." The room went silent. Klein later reported feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Voss asked Whitmore to clarify. Whitmore shook his head. He said that verbal language was insufficient, that the information was not linguistic, it was structural, mathematical, encoded in relationships between frequencies. He said he had been writing it down, translating it as best he could, that the symbols on the walls were the beginning of a syntax, a way of organizing the information so that it could be understood by others. But when Voss looked at the symbols, he saw no order, no logic, just marks. Whitmore was taken to the Institute's medical wing later that day. Dr. Lillian Gross, the staff physician, examined him. She found signs of severe sleep deprivation, malnutrition, elevated heart rate, but no signs of psychosis. Whitmore was coherent, responsive. He answered questions appropriately. He showed no delusions about his identity or surroundings. But when Dr. Gross asked him what he believed he had been communicating with, Whitmore paused for a long time. And then he said something that was recorded in her medical notes. "I do not know if it is one or many. I do not know if it is aware of me, but it is not silent, and it has been speaking for a very long time." Whitmore was placed on mandatory rest. His laboratory was locked. The recording tapes were confiscated by Voss. An external consultant, a psychologist named Dr. Raymond Fitch, was brought in to evaluate Whitmore's mental state. Fitch spent 3 days interviewing him. His final report was submitted on January 5, 1937. In it, Fitch concluded that Whitmore was not delusional. He was not hallucinating. His beliefs were highly unconventional, but they were internally consistent. Fitch noted that Whitmore displayed what he called an intense conviction, a belief system that had formed around a subjective experience. Fitch could not determine whether the experience was real or imagined, but he concluded that Whitmore genuinely believed he had made contact with something. Fitch recommended continued observation, but he did not recommend institutionalization. Voss was conflicted. He reviewed the recording tapes himself. What he heard was difficult to describe. Static, oscillating tones, pulses of sound that rose and fell in irregular patterns. There was no voice, no clear signal, just noise. But Voss could not deny that the patterns repeated, exactly as Whitmore had claimed. On January 12th, Whitmore requested permission to return to his work. He said he had more to document, that the reception was ongoing, that stopping now would mean losing critical data. Voss denied the request. He said the Institute could not support research that lacked clear scientific methodology. Whitmore accepted the decision without protest, but 2 nights later, he disappeared. Security logs showed that he left his cottage at 11:43 in the evening. He was seen walking toward the forest. He carried a satchel over his shoulder. No one stopped him. It was not against Institute policy to leave the grounds. He never returned. A search was conducted the following morning. His cottage was found empty. The satchel he had been carrying was gone. His personal belongings were left behind, including the notebook he had kept throughout his research. The notebook was reviewed by Voss and Mercer. It contained pages of diagrams, waveforms, frequency notations, and writing, pages and pages of symbols, the same symbols that had been on the walls of the resonance chamber. The writing became denser toward the end of the notebook, less organized. The symbols overlapped, bled into margins. The final page contained a single sentence written in English. "I am going to meet the source." No trace of Harold Whitmore was found in the weeks that followed. Local authorities were notified. A search of the surrounding forest was conducted. No evidence of foul play was discovered. No body was recovered. The case was classified as a voluntary disappearance. The Belmont Research Institute continued operating until 1946. When it closed, all research materials were archived. Whitmore's laboratory was sealed. The recording tapes were placed in storage. The notebook was kept in a locked file cabinet in the director's office. For 37 years, no one entered that laboratory. In 1983, the building was sold to a private university. During the inventory process, a staff member discovered the sealed laboratory. When they opened it, they found the room exactly as it had been left. Dust covered the equipment. The symbols on the walls of the resonance chamber were still visible, faded but intact, and on the table in the center of the room, there was a notebook, open. The ink looked fresh. It was not the same notebook Whitmore had left behind. This one was new. The pages were filled with symbols, the same symbols, but the handwriting was different, smaller, more precise. On the final page, there was a date written in English, December 22nd, 1946. 10 years after Whitmore disappeared, the notebook was turned over to the university's Research Ethics Board. An investigation was launched, but no records existed of anyone entering the laboratory after it had been sealed. No security logs, no maintenance reports. The door had remained locked from the outside. The board concluded that the notebook had been placed there before the laboratory was sealed, that the date was either a mistake or a fabrication. The case was closed. But one member of the investigation team, a historian named Dr. Evelyn Marsh, disagreed. She requested access to the original recording tapes from 1936. After months of bureaucratic delays, she was granted permission. She spent weeks analyzing the tapes, using modern audio equipment, filtering out layers of static, isolating specific frequencies, and she found something. Embedded within the noise, there was a signal, a repeating pattern, exactly 11 minutes and 43 seconds long. The pattern was not random. It contained structure, intervals, ratios, mathematical relationships. Dr. Marsh published a paper on her findings in 1987. In it, she proposed that Whitmore had not been experiencing a psychological episode, that he had detected a real signal, a signal of unknown origin. She speculated that the signal could be a natural phenomenon, electromagnetic emissions from a geological source, or atmospheric interference, but she acknowledged that the precise repetition was unusual, that it suggested intentionality. Her paper was largely ignored by the academic community. In 1991, Dr. Marsh received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photocopy of a handwritten letter. The letter was dated March 8, 1947. It was addressed to Dr. Emil Voss. It was signed by someone named Harold Whitmore. The letter was brief. It read, "I have found the place where the signal originates. It is not of this earth, but it is not from beyond it either. It exists in between, in the spaces where thought and matter overlap. I can no longer return, but I am not lost. I am listening, and I am learning. Tell them that the instructions are not for us. They are for what we are becoming." Dr. Marsh had the letter analyzed. The handwriting matched samples of Whitmore's writing from 1936. But authentication was inconclusive. The paper was modern. The ink was recent. No further communication was ever received. The recording tapes are currently stored in the archives of Columbia University. Access is restricted. The laboratory where Whitmore worked was demolished in the year 2004. The land is now part of a state park. The notebook found in 1983 was lost during a transfer between storage facilities in 1996. Some researchers continue to study the recordings, searching for patterns, meaning, structure. Others say the signal was never real, that it was auditory pareidolia, the human mind finding patterns in randomness. But every few years someone reports hearing it, a tone, low and steady, repeating every 11 minutes and 43 seconds, and those who listen long enough say they begin to understand. The last known mention of Harold Whitmore appeared in a private journal belonging to Dr. Evelyn Marsh. The entry was dated October 31st, 2002. It read, "I played the tape again tonight. I think I heard what he heard. Not words, not voices, but something underneath, a rhythm, a structure. It feels like it is waiting, like it has always been waiting for someone to listen long enough, to match the pattern, to respond. I'm afraid that if I keep listening, I will not be able to stop." Dr. Marsh passed away in 2009. Her research notes were donated to the university where she taught. Among them was a single audio file, labeled only with a date. December 22nd, 1936. The file has never been publicly released. The symbols Whitmore drew on the walls of the resonance chamber have been photographed, catalogued, Analyzed by linguists, mathematicians, and cryptographers, no one has successfully decoded them, but in 2016, a graduate student named Michael Torres noticed something. The symbols appeared in a pattern, a fractal pattern, self-similar at different scales, the same structures repeating, growing more complex with each iteration. Torres proposed that the symbols were not a language, they were a map, a representation of information encoded in recursive layers. He submitted his findings to a journal. The paper was rejected. Reviewers said the analysis was speculative, unsupported by evidence. Torres continued his research independently. In 2018, he disappeared. His apartment was found empty. His computer was gone. His notes were missing. A single page remained, taped to the wall above his desk. It contained 3 lines of text. The signal is not transmitted, it is resonant. It exists in the space between observer and observed. To hear it is to change it, and to change it is to become part of it. No further information about Michael Torres has been found. The Belmont Research Institute closed in 1946. The stated reason was lack of funding, but internal documents suggest another factor. Several researchers reported experiencing symptoms: insomnia, auditory disturbances, obsessive focus on specific tasks. One researcher, Dr. Helen Crane, wrote in her final report that the building itself felt wrong, that the walls seemed to absorb sound, that conversations echoed in ways that defied acoustics. She requested a transfer. It was granted. She left in July of 1945. In her exit interview, she said something that was noted by the interviewer but never followed up on. Dr. Whitmore may have found something, but I do not think he found it in the laboratory. I think it found him. The Institute's records were sealed by order of the Board of Directors. They remain sealed to this day. In 2012, a documentary filmmaker named Sarah Linden attempted to produce a film about Harold Whitmore. She obtained permission to interview former staff members. Most were elderly, some had passed away. Those who agreed to speak provided little new information. But one interview stood out. An elderly man named Thomas Brennan, the same janitor who had reported hearing Whitmore speaking in the laboratory. Brennan was 94 years old at the time of the interview. His memory was fragmented, but he recalled the night in 1936. He said he had not been entirely truthful in his original report. He said that when he heard the voice coming from the laboratory, he had opened the door slightly, just to look inside. Whitmore was standing in the resonance chamber. His back was turned. His arms were raised, and he was not alone. Brennan said he saw shadows moving, shapes that did not correspond to any light source. He said the shapes seemed to cluster around Whitmore, like they were listening. Brennan closed the door immediately. He never mentioned what he had seen. When asked why, he said he was afraid, not of Whitmore, but of being thought insane. The interview was included in the documentary, but the film was never completed. Linden said she lost funding, but colleagues reported that she had become increasingly withdrawn during production, that she stopped returning calls, that she seemed distracted. Linden has not made another film since. The resonance chamber where Whitmore worked was photographed before the building was demolished. The photographs show a small room, copper mesh on the walls, faded symbols, a chair in the center. In one photograph, taken from the doorway, there is a reflection in the copper mesh. It appears to show a figure standing in the room, but the room was empty when the photograph was taken. The photographer, a man named David Eng, reviewed the image. He said it was likely a double exposure or a lens flare. He could not explain why the figure appeared to be wearing clothing from the 1930s. The photograph is available in the Columbia University archives. In 2023, a researcher named Dr. Amelia Cross published a brief paper titled Whitmore and the Phantom Frequency. In it, she argued that Whitmore had inadvertently tapped into a form of electromagnetic feedback, that his equipment had created a loop, a self-reinforcing signal that his brain interpreted as external. She concluded that there was no mystery, only a man who had misinterpreted sensory data. Her paper received moderate attention. But it did not end the debate, because the signal continues to be reported by researchers, by technicians, by people who have never heard of Harold Whitmore. A low tone, steady, repeating every 11 minutes and 43 seconds. And those who hear it say the same thing, that it feels like it is waiting, that it feels like a question, that if you listen long enough, you will want to answer. The last known communication attributed to Harold Whitmore was a single typed letter. Found in a storage unit in upstate New York in 2019, the unit had belonged to Dr. Emil Voss. It had been sealed since his death in 1968. The letter was dated November 14, 1952. It read, "The signal does not come from above or below. It comes from within, from the space between what we are and what we could be. It is not a message, it is a mirror. And if you stare long enough, it will show you what you are becoming. I'm no longer Harold Whitmore. I am the listener, and I will always be listening." No postmark, no envelope, just the letter. Forensic analysis confirmed the typewriter was consistent with models used in the 1950s, but the paper was modern. No explanation has been provided. The signal has been recorded, analyzed, archived, but it has never been decoded. Some say it cannot be decoded, that it is not meant to be understood, only heard. Others say that understanding it requires more than logic, that it requires something else, something that cannot be taught. And a few believe that Harold Whitmore succeeded, that he found the source, that he is still there, listening. The last archived recording was made in January of 2025. The equipment was set up in the remains of the Belmont Institute's foundation, now part of a public park. The signal was detected, clear, repeating, exactly as it had been described in 1936. But this time there was something new, a second signal, overlapping the first, different frequency, same interval, as if something was responding. The equipment was dismantled the following day. No further recordings have been authorized. Some say the signal stopped after that. Others say it continues, but no one is listening anymore. The files remain sealed, the tapes remain archived, the symbols remain undecoded. And somewhere in the silence between transmission and reception, between question and answer, the pattern continues, waiting.